Judge Elena Vasquez had built her reputation on granite. Unshakable, immovable, carved from decades of unwavering principle. At 52, she commanded the most prestigious courtroom in the district, her nameplate polished to mirror brightness, reflecting a career that had never known compromise. Legal scholars quoted her opinions, law students memorized her reasoning, and prosecutors and defense attorneys alike approached her bench with equal measures of respect and trepidation. But granite, Elena was learning, could fracture from within. The morning started like any other. Coffee at 5:30 a.m., review of case files until 7 a.m. Her ritual walk through chambers where photographs of her late husband, Miguel, smiled from frames positioned between leather-bound legal texts. 23 years on the bench, 15 years widowed, Elena had found solace in the predictable rhythms of jurisprudence. Justice was clean. Justice was logical. Justice didn't leave voicemails at midnight. The phone call came during her lunch recess, a number she didn't recognize but a voice that made her blood crystallize. "Judge Vasquez, we need to talk." The caller's tone carried the weight of someone accustomed to being heard. Vincent Carrera, district attorney, political golden boy, and the man whose aggressive prosecution rates had made him untouchable in municipal circles. "I'm not sure what this is regarding, Mr. Carrera, but it's regarding your daughter's situation at Stanford Medical School." Elena's pen stopped moving across the legal pad where she'd been noting tomorrow's docket. Sophia, her brilliant, driven daughter who was 3 months from graduation, already accepted into a competitive residency program. Elena hadn't spoken to Sophia in 2 weeks. Unusual, but medical school demanded everything. "I don't understand." Plagiarism charges. Academic misconduct. Very serious allegations that could end her career before it begins. Carrera's voice carried false sympathy, like honey poured over broken glass. "Stanford's being very thorough in their investigation." Elena's hand trembled almost imperceptibly. She set down the pen, focusing on the steady tick of the antique clock Miguel had given her for their 10th anniversary. "What does this have to do with you?" "I have friends on Stanford's board of trustees. People who understand that sometimes brilliant students make mistakes under pressure." The pause stretched like a held breath. "The same way sometimes brilliant judges make decisions that serve the greater good." The implications crystallized with terrifying clarity. Elena knew Carrera's caseload, knew the upcoming trial of Marcus Rivera, a whistleblower whose testimony could expose a web of municipal contract corruption that reached into the highest levels of city government. Rivera's case was scheduled for her courtroom next month. "I won't be blackmailed." "This isn't blackmail, Your Honor. This is conversation between professionals who understand how the world actually works." Carrera's tone shifted, becoming almost paternal. "Your daughter's future, your legacy, these things matter. Sometimes justice isn't about rigid adherence to procedure. Sometimes it's about protecting the people we love." Elena stared at the photograph of Miguel, remembering his words from their early years together. "The law isn't just what we uphold, Elena. It's what we become." He'd been referring to their shared idealism then, their belief that justice could be pure. After hanging up, Elena sat in the suffocating silence of her chambers. Outside, the city hummed with the complex machinery of governance, contracts signed, deals struck, compromises made in boardrooms and backrooms. She'd always believed herself separate from that machinery, elevated above it by the black robes that symbolized impartiality. Now she understood that separation had been an illusion. The machinery had found her, had always known where she was, had simply been waiting for the right pressure point. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sophia. "Mom, I need to talk. Something's happening at school. Can you call?" Elena stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Her reflection ghosted across the surface. In that reflection, she saw not the granite judge she'd always believed herself to be, but a mother whose child was drowning, and a woman who might have to choose between saving her daughter and saving her soul. The foundation had cracked. Now, she had to decide whether to shore it up or let it crumble completely. Elena's sleepless nights had become a ritual of torment. each hour marked by the relentless progression of her bedside clock and the weight of impossible choices. 3 weeks had passed since Carrera's call, 3 weeks of Sophia's increasingly frantic messages about Stanford's investigation, 3 weeks of staring at Marcus Rivera's case file while her hands grew steadier and her conscience grew quieter. The transformation was subtle, but undeniable. Elena found herself noticing things she'd previously ignored. The expensive watch on the bailiff's wrist, the way certain attorneys seemed to anticipate her rulings, the deference shown to her by court staff that went beyond professional respect. Had these signs always been there? Had she been willfully blind to the ecosystem of influence that surrounded her? Dr. Sarah Chen, Elena's longtime friend and the only person who knew about her sleepless nights, had been direct during their coffee meeting. "You're considering it," Sarah had said, studying Elena's face with the clinical precision that made her an exceptional psychiatrist. "You're actually considering compromising everything you've built. My daughter's career could survive this if she's innocent, but your integrity won't survive if you're guilty." Sarah's words had cut deep, but not as deep as Elena's growing realization that integrity might be a luxury she could no longer afford. The Rivera case file revealed a meticulous investigation into municipal corruption, documented payoffs, and a pattern of contract manipulation that implicated 3 city council members, 2 department heads, and a network of contractors who'd been systematically overcharging the city for years. Rivera, a former city planning administrator, possessed documents, recordings, and testimony that could bring down what prosecutors were calling the most significant corruption scandal in the city's history. Under normal circumstances, Elena would have been energized by such a case, the opportunity to serve justice in its purest form, to demonstrate that no one stood above the law. Now she found herself analyzing the case not for its legal merits but for its political ramifications. Carrera had been clever in his approach, never explicitly stating what he wanted, never crossing the line into overt bribery or coercion. Their subsequent conversations had been professional, even cordial, discussing procedural matters and scheduling concerns. But the subtext was always there. Sophia's future hanging in the balance, Elena's power to influence the outcome of a case that could reshape the city's political landscape. The breakthrough came during a seemingly routine pretrial hearing. Marcus Rivera sat at the defendant's table, a slight man in his 50s whose nervous energy spoke to both his conviction and his fear. His attorney, Maria Santos, was young, idealistic, the kind of lawyer Elena had once been. As Santos argued, for the admission of Rivera's evidence, Elena found herself studying Rivera's face, seeing not a whistleblower seeking justice but a man whose testimony could destroy careers, lives, families. For the first time in her judicial career, Elena felt the weight of consequences beyond legal precedent. The city council members Rivera would implicate had children, mortgages, elderly parents dependent on their salaries. The contractors faced not just financial ruin but potential prison time. The ripple effects would touch hundreds of lives, thousands of jobs. When had she started thinking like this? When had she begun weighing justice against collateral damage? The answer came during her lunch break, in another call from Carrera. "Stanford's investigation is moving forward," he said without preamble. "The plagiarism allegations are quite serious. Multiple sources, apparently, very thorough documentation." Elena closed her eyes, recognizing the manufactured nature of the evidence while simultaneously feeling grateful for Carrera's implied power to make it disappear. "What specifically are you asking me to do?" "I'm not asking you to do anything illegal, Your Honor. Simply to exercise judicial discretion. Rivera's evidence was obtained through questionable means. He exceeded his authority, violated confidentiality agreements, potentially broke federal privacy laws. A strict interpretation of admissibility rules might find significant portions of his testimony inadmissible. The legal reasoning was sound, Elena realized with growing horror. There were legitimate grounds to exclude Rivera's evidence, precedents that supported restrictive interpretation of whistleblower protections. She could destroy the prosecution's case while maintaining perfect legal cover. That evening, Elena stood in her chambers long after the courthouse had emptied, staring at the scales of justice mounted on her wall, a gift from her law school graduating class, inscribed with words that now seemed almost mocking. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Sophia. Mom, I'm scared. They're saying I could be expelled. I don't understand. How this happened. I never cheated. Never. You believe me, don't you? Elena's reflection in the darkened window showed a woman she barely recognized, still wearing judicial robes, still carrying the external symbols of authority and integrity, but hollow-eyed and haunted. She was no longer the granite judge she'd once been. She was becoming someone else entirely, someone who could rationalize corruption as pragmatism, who could weigh her daughter's future against the demands of justice and find the scales wanting. The descent had begun, and Elena was discovering that each step downward made the next step easier, until she could no longer remember what solid ground had felt like beneath her feet. The morning of the Rivera hearing arrived with unseasonable clarity, autumn sunlight streaming through Elena's chambers with an intensity that made her squint as she reviewed her notes for the final time. She had made her decision during the darkest hours before dawn, sitting in Miguel's old chair with his photograph in her hands, whispering apologies to a man who could no longer hear them. Maria Santos arrived early, her arms laden with evidence boxes and the fierce determination that reminded Elena of her younger self. Your Honor, this case represents everything our justice system was designed to protect. The right of citizens to expose corruption without fear of retaliation. Elena nodded, maintaining the facade of judicial impartiality while her stomach churned with self-loathing. The courtroom filled steadily, reporters sensing a significant story, city officials sitting with forced casualness, Rivera himself looking smaller and more vulnerable than Elena remembered. But it was the unexpected presence in the gallery that shattered Elena's carefully constructed composure. Sophia, sitting in the back row, her medical school identification badge still clipped to her jacket, her face etched with confusion and desperate hope. Sophia? Elena's voice cracked slightly. What are you doing here? Her daughter stood, moving with the determined stride Elena recognized from childhood, from every moment when Sophia had decided to confront difficulty head-on rather than avoid it. Mom, we need to talk now. The bailiff looked uncertainly between judge and visitor. Elena felt the weight of every eye in the courtroom, the delicate timing of her planned ruling suddenly disrupted by the most important person in her world. Your Honor, Santos interjected. We're prepared to present our opening arguments. 10-minute recess, Elena announced, her voice steadier than her hands. Clear the courtroom except for counsel. In chambers, Sophia confronted her mother with the kind of direct honesty that had always defined their relationship. I know what's happening, Mom. I know someone's trying to manipulate you through me. Elena's carefully maintained composure crumbled. The plagiarism charges are fabricated. I figured that out when I hired a private investigator. Sophia pulled out a folder thick with documents. The accusations came from a professor who's been taking money from pharmaceutical companies to alter research results. When I threatened to report him, he struck first. But here's the thing, Mom. I have evidence of his corruption just like Marcus Rivera has evidence of city corruption. The parallel struck Elena like a physical blow. Her daughter had faced the same choice, remain silent and protect herself or speak truth regardless of personal cost, and had chosen differently. Sophia, you don't understand the complexity. I understand that you raised me to believe integrity isn't conditional. Sophia's voice carried disappointment so profound it made Elena flinch. I understand that you taught me justice matters more than personal convenience. What I don't understand is why you're about to betray everything you've ever stood for. Through the chamber's window, Elena could see the courtroom filling again. Rivera taking his seat with the quiet dignity of a man who had already lost everything except his determination to tell the truth. Santos was organizing her notes with methodical precision, preparing to present evidence that could reshape the city's political landscape, if Elena allowed it. "Your daughter's right," came a voice from the doorway. Marcus Rivera stood there, having somehow evaded the bailiff, his slight frame carrying surprising authority. "I'm sorry to intrude, Your Honor, but I overheard. I want you to know. I understand what they're threatening you with. They threatened my family, too. My wife lost her job. My son was rejected from colleges he was qualified for. They know how to find our pressure points." Elena stared at this man whose testimony she'd planned to suppress, seeing not an abstract legal problem but a fellow parent who'd chosen truth over safety. "But here's what I learned," Rivera continued. "When we let them silence us to protect the people we love, we're not actually protecting anyone. We're just teaching our children that corruption wins, that justice is a luxury we can't afford." He looked directly at Sophia. "Your daughter deserves better than that lesson." The courtroom was silent when they returned, charged with the tension of impending revelation. Elena took her seat, feeling the weight of her gavel differently than she had in decades. Santos began presenting Rivera's evidence, documents, recordings, testimony that painted a clear picture of systemic corruption. When the prosecution finished, Elena faced the moment she'd been dreading and anticipating for weeks. The defense attorney rose, ready to argue for the exclusion of Rivera's evidence based on the technical grounds Elena had prepared to accept. Instead, Elena heard her own voice, steady and clear. "The court finds the evidence admissible and credible. Mr. Rivera's testimony demonstrates the courage our justice system was designed to protect and encourage." The defense attorney's objection died unspoken. Carrera, sitting in the gallery, went rigid with understanding. Elena met his gaze directly, seeing fury and calculation in equal measure, knowing she had made an enemy of a powerful man. But when she looked at Sophia, she saw something she had almost forgotten. Pride, recognition, the reflection of the woman Elena had once been and could choose to be again. The scales of justice, Elena realized, had never been about perfect balance. They were about the courage to weigh truth against convenience, integrity against safety, and choose the harder path, because it was the right one. The reckoning had come, and Elena had chosen to meet it standing upright. The firestorm began within hours of Elena's ruling. By evening, news vans lined the street outside her modest suburban home, their satellite dishes reaching toward a sky that seemed darker than usual. The fallout was swift and merciless. 3 city council members arrested, 2 department heads suspended, contracts worth millions under investigation. The city's political establishment, so carefully constructed over decades, crumbled with stunning speed. Elena sat in her darkened living room, watching her professional destruction unfold on every local news channel. The phone had been ringing incessantly, reporters seeking comments, colleagues offering support or expressing outrage, political allies distancing themselves with transparent haste. She'd stopped answering after the 10th call, choosing instead to sit in the silence Miguel had once filled with his gentle presence. Vincent Carrera's retaliation was surgically precise. Within 72 hours, Elena faced a formal judicial misconduct complaint alleging bias, improper ex parte communication, and failure to recuse herself from a case where she had personal interests. The charges were technically baseless, but politically devastating, enough to trigger an ethics investigation that would drag on for months, destroying her reputation regardless of the outcome. Sophia moved back home temporarily, ostensibly to provide support, but actually, Elena suspected, to ensure her mother didn't retreat too far into isolation. The plagiarism charges had evaporated as mysteriously as they'd appeared, but the experience had left both women changed. They moved around each other carefully, rebuilding trust that had been damaged by Elena's temporary willingness to compromise everything they'd believed in. Dr. Chen called, Sophia announced on the 4th evening, setting down groceries with determined normalcy. "She wants to know if you're eating." Elena looked up from Miguel's journal, which she'd been reading obsessively since the hearing. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're catastrophizing." Sophia sat across from her mother, medical training evident in her clinical assessment. You made the right choice, Mom. The hard choice. That should count for something. The hard choice has consequences. Elena gestured toward the window, where camera crews maintained their vigil. My career is over. My reputation is destroyed. The Judicial Ethics Board will likely recommend my removal from the bench. So what? Sophia's question carried startling conviction. You spent 23 years building a reputation for integrity. One moment of doubt doesn't erase that history. And choosing justice over self-preservation doesn't make you a failure, it makes you human. Elena had been avoiding the larger implications of her choice, focusing instead on immediate consequences. But Sophia's words forced her to confront a more complex reality. The Rivera case had exposed not just municipal corruption, but the subtle ways the system pressured even honest officials to look the other way, to prioritize stability over justice, to protect their positions rather than their principles. The irony was bitter. In finally acting with complete integrity, Elena had made herself unemployable within the system she'd served faithfully for decades. No political appointment would come her way. No prestigious law firm would welcome a judge who'd demonstrated such inconvenient independence. No administrative position would be offered to someone who'd proven willing to disrupt established power structures. Maria Santos visited the following week, bringing flowers and gratitude that felt heavier than criticism. Your Honor, I wanted you to know, Marcus Rivera's testimony has led to 17 additional witnesses coming forward. The corruption was more extensive than we imagined. Elena received this news with mixed emotions. Vindication for her choice, yes, but also evidence of how much damage might have been done if she'd chosen differently. How is Mr. Rivera? Struggling. He's received death threats. His family's been harassed. He's had trouble finding work. Santos paused. But he told me something interesting. He said knowing that someone in authority finally listened, finally chose truth over convenience. It made all his suffering worthwhile. After Santos left, Elena walked through her house, really looking at it for the first time in weeks. Miguel's photographs, her law books, the accumulation of a lifetime spent in service to justice. This was what she'd been protecting when she'd nearly compromised her principles. Not just her career, but her identity, her sense of purpose, her understanding of who she was. But who was she now? The question haunted her through sleepless nights and hollow days. The ethics investigation proceeded with bureaucratic inevitability. Former colleagues avoided her calls. The legal community that had once celebrated her opinions now whispered about her judgment, her stability, her fitness for judicial service. The lowest point came 3 weeks after the hearing, when Elena found herself in a downtown law office, meeting with a crisis management consultant who specialized in rehabilitating damaged judicial reputations. The woman, perfectly coiffed, expensively dressed, laid out a strategy for survival. Apologize for any appearance of impropriety, emphasize her long record of service, suggest that emotional stress over her daughter's situation had affected her judgment. We can frame this as a momentary lapse rather than a character revelation, the consultant explained. You're human. You made a mistake under pressure. You regret any confusion your actions may have caused. Elena listened to the strategy that would save her career, restore her reputation, and allow her to return to the bench with minimal damage. All she had to do was deny the most honorable choice she'd ever made, characterize her moment of genuine integrity as temporary insanity. She walked out of the meeting without saying a word. That evening, she called Sophia to her study, where Miguel's photograph sat beside her judicial appointment certificate. I need to tell you something, Elena said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. I'm not going to apologize for doing the right thing. I'm not going to pretend that choosing justice was a mistake. Sophia smiled, the first genuine smile Elena had seen from her daughter since the crisis began. Good, because the mother who raised me would never compromise truth for convenience. Elena nodded, feeling something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, but acceptance. She had lost her career, her reputation, her place in the system she'd served faithfully. But she had found something more valuable. the knowledge that when it mattered most, when everything she valued was at stake, she had chosen correctly. The aftermath would continue, but Elena was no longer afraid of it. She was finally becoming the person Miguel had always believed her to be. 6 months after the Rivera hearing, Elena discovered that exile from the judicial system felt remarkably like freedom. The ethics investigation had concluded with her voluntary resignation, a face-saving measure that allowed her to leave the bench with dignity while ending her judicial career forever. The news crews had moved on to fresher scandals. The political establishment had found new equilibrium, and Elena had found unexpected peace in rebuilding her life from first principles. The law clinic occupied a cramped storefront in the city's forgotten east side. Wedged between a laundromat and a community grocery store, Elena arrived each morning at 7, unlocking doors and switching on fluorescent lights that revealed a space that bore no resemblance to her former marble-columned courtroom. Folding chairs, card tables, boxes of case files, and a coffee pot that produced liquid more suited to industrial cleaning than human consumption. It was the opposite of everything she'd once represented. Yet it was here, representing immigrants, tenants facing eviction, workers cheated of wages, and families navigating bureaucratic mazes, that Elena rediscovered why she'd fallen in love with law in the first place. Justice, she was learning, wasn't an abstract principle debated in appellate decisions. It was Mrs. Rodriguez keeping her apartment, despite her landlord's intimidation. It was Ahmed Osman receiving the disability benefits he'd been wrongfully denied. It was the Martinez family avoiding deportation because someone finally listened to their story. Judge, sorry, Elena, corrected Marcus Rivera, who volunteered at the clinic twice a week, helping other whistleblowers navigate the legal and personal consequences of speaking truth to power. The community college called. They want to know if you're still interested in teaching that paralegal certification course. Elena looked up from the case file she'd been reviewing, a wrongful termination claim that would never make headlines but would determine whether a single mother could pay her rent. Tell them yes. When do they want me to start? Rivera smiled, understanding the significance of her decision. Teaching would provide stable income, intellectual stimulation, and the opportunity to shape the next generation of legal professionals. More importantly, it would allow Elena to share the lessons she'd learned about integrity, courage, and the true meaning of justice. The transformation hadn't been easy. Elena's savings had dwindled rapidly without her judicial salary, forcing her to sell Miguel's vintage car and take out a second mortgage on their home. Former colleagues who'd once sought her guidance now crossed the street to avoid awkward conversations. The social invitations that had once filled her calendar disappeared entirely, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered. But the most profound change was internal. The granite judge who'd once commanded deference and respect had been replaced by someone more flexible, more human, more genuinely connected to the people she served. Elena found herself laughing more, sleeping better, looking forward to each day's challenges rather than dreading their complexities. Sophia, now completing her residency at the county hospital, had become not just her daughter but her closest friend and fiercest supporter. "You know what I love about your new life?" she said during one of their weekly dinners. "You're actually happy. For the first time since Dad died, you seem genuinely happy." Elena considered this assessment while watching Sophia navigate the challenges of medical training with the same integrity Elena had finally learned to embrace completely. "I spent 23 years thinking happiness came from respect, from status, from being seen as important. Turns out it comes from being useful." The vindication, when it came, was quiet and personal rather than public and dramatic. Maria Santos, now a senior prosecutor, stopped by the clinic one afternoon with news that the Rivera case had spawned a federal investigation into municipal corruption across 3 states. The model of systemic reform that had emerged from Elena's decision to allow Rivera's testimony was being replicated in cities nationwide. "None of this would have happened without your courage," Santos told Elena. "You changed everything." Elena accepted the praise gracefully, but without the hunger for validation that had once defined her. External recognition was pleasant but no longer necessary. She had found more sustainable sources of satisfaction in daily acts of service, in small victories achieved on behalf of people who had nowhere else to turn. The most unexpected redemption came from Vincent Carrera himself, who appeared at the clinic on a gray February morning, looking older and somehow diminished. The corruption investigation he'd tried so hard to suppress had eventually reached his office, revealing a pattern of prosecutorial misconduct that had cost him his position and his political future. "I came to apologize," he said without preamble, standing awkwardly in the clinic's cramped waiting area. "What I did to you, to your daughter, it was wrong. I justified it as protecting the city, but I was really protecting myself." Elena studied the man who had nearly destroyed her integrity, seeing not an enemy but a fellow human being who'd made different choices under similar pressures. "What will you do now?" "I don't know. My law license is under review. My reputation is gone. My family barely speaks to me." Carrera's voice carried the hollow sound of someone still coming to terms with consequences. "I keep thinking about what you said in that courtroom, about choosing truth over convenience. I wish I'd been that brave." Elena offered him coffee from the terrible machine, a gesture of basic human kindness that cost her nothing but seemed to mean everything to him. It's never too late to start choosing differently. As spring arrived, Elena received an unexpected invitation. Harvard Law School wanted her to deliver the commencement address, honoring her commitment to justice in the face of personal cost. Standing at the podium where she'd once dreamed of, speaking as a successful judge, Elena looked out at faces bright with ambition and possibility. "You will face moments," she told them, "when doing the right thing will cost you everything you think you want. In those moments, remember that integrity isn't something you have. It's something you choose again and again, especially when choosing it hurts." After the ceremony, Elena walked across campus with Sophia, who had driven up from the hospital, to hear her mother speak. The late afternoon sun slanted through ancient trees, illuminating a future that felt both uncertain and full of promise. "Any regrets?" Sophia asked. Elena considered the question seriously, thinking of the career she'd lost, the reputation she'd sacrificed, the comfortable life she'd abandoned. Then she thought of Mrs. Rodriguez in her apartment, Ahmed Osman receiving his benefits, the Martinez family safe from deportation, Marcus Rivera's quiet smile of vindication. "None," she said. And for the first time since Miguel's death, Elena Vasquez felt completely at peace with the person she had chosen to become. The weight of the gavel had been replaced by something lighter, but more enduring. The knowledge that, when it mattered most, she had chosen justice over safety, truth over convenience, integrity over survival. That choice had cost her everything she thought she valued and given her back everything that actually mattered. Justice, Elena had learned, wasn't found in marble courtrooms or appellate decisions. It lived in daily choices, in small acts of courage in the decision to serve others even when no one was watching. And in that service she had found not just redemption but something far more valuable, the quiet satisfaction of a life lived in alignment with her deepest values, regardless of the cost.